we have been telling you about this situation of protests outside Supreme Court justices' homes. And there's a lot going on here. Let's start with the protests outside of Justice Roberts and Kavanaugh's homes, I believe in Montgomery County, which is in Maryland. And then the protest that is now, as of last night, has extended to the state of Virginia, where I actually forget what the area is in Virginia, but anyway, Alito's home in Northern Virginia has also been the site of protests. People are pointing out, first of all, this is just childish, reckless, and irresponsible. Start with that. This is not the way in a civil society that people should be acting. And I would point out that even the Washington Post, believe it or not, the editorial board yesterday wrote a piece saying, leave the justices alone at home. The Washington Post editorial board, which I can tell you in general would lie down in traffic to keep abortion legal and to support a Roe v. Wade last-minute saving by a reversal of the Supreme Court justices. The Washington Post is saying, yeah, no, knock it off with the protests outside of the judges' homes. I think a part of that is the recognition that this is not legal. It is not legal at the federal level. There is a statute that very understandably, it makes perfect sense, bars people from trying to intimidate judges and in any way affect the judicial process. And having an angry mob outside your home when you're a Supreme Court judge, or any judge for that matter, is intimidation affecting the process. Now, we don't think the Biden DOJ will do anything. They're not going to send the FBI in to clear out the area, not because they shouldn't as a function of law, but because we all know the politics here. Biden's DOJ is a joke, and they're not Merrick Garland, who was putting parents on notice that maybe you're a domestic terrorist if you got a problem with the school board in your neighborhood. But no issue with these threats of Supreme Court justices. But then, Clay, the additional component of it is that under Virginia law, I believe also under Maryland law, there are statutes that prohibit protest gatherings outside of private homes, which, given that so many public officials, by the way, live in Maryland or Virginia who work in D.C., you understand how this would be a law in both places. And there were people very critical of Glenn Youngkin, the governor of Virginia, who has done some good things since he took office. We've noted it here on the show. But as we always tell you, we call balls and strikes here, folks. You know, when it's good, it's good. When it's not, we tell you, right? When there's a problem, we address it, even on our own team, so to speak, even on the right, even with conservatives. Clay, what do you make of this with Youngkin saying they'll keep the judges safe, but they're not going to go in there and say you're not allowed to protest outside their home?
I don't believe that anybody of any political bent should be able to protest outside of anyone's home. That includes me. That includes you, Buck. That certainly includes anybody who is involved in the judiciary. I think this should apply if you are a Republican, if you are a Democrat. There are plenty of places to seek redress for political opinions. I don't believe that our neighborhoods outside of people's homes should be one of them, period. Okay? And that is a content-neutral policy that I would apply, that I believe Merrick Garland needs to apply, regardless of what the politics involved are. Having said that, if you are Glenn Youngkin, or if you are Jason Miyares, people who have been on this show before, he's the Attorney General of Virginia, Republicans, the challenge that I think they face, Buck, is if you arrest people for this, are you creating a much larger protest going forward and making the people that you arrest martyrs? I think you might very well be doing that. And so I'm sure in the back of their minds, they're trying to analyze this and say, what is the best way to make this disappear sooner rather than later? If we arrest people, are we going to make it worse? And I don't know for sure what the answer is. My concern is that you are creating an environment that allows violence to fester. And at some point in time, if that violence explodes, as we've already seen it happening in Madison, Wisconsin, in terms of a Molotov cocktail being thrown into a anti-abortion
group,
location. I think the challenge becomes, how do you reconcile this? And this is why, Buck, to me, the solution is the opinion has to come out now. Chief Justice Roberts has to release this opinion. And I understand the argument of, well, we can't allow whoever the leaker was to change the time frame of what we want to do when it comes to releasing this opinion. And it wasn't scheduled to come out until late June. And right now we're only talking about mid-May. The leak threw that into the dustbin of history, in my opinion, Buck. And what needs to happen, and I'm going to keep hammering this, is Chief Justice Roberts need to sign on to it, make it a 6-3 decision, so we're not talking about one justice switching and making this law change. And on top of that, it needs to come out immediately, because I think that would dilute the value of protesting at the Supreme Court justices' homes. That's the solution.
Do you think Roberts will, by the way? Because we might have to have a side bet here. I think there's no chance Roberts is going to go over in Georgia.
You think he's going to side with the other three?
Yep. I think he's going to. He's going to write a dissent, and he's going to side with the other three. He's going to say this goes too far.
You may be right, but if he truly cares about the legitimacy of the court, and he's willing to sign on to, which is written reports, the 15-week ban in Mississippi, then he needs to go all in and say that this should go back to states. Because if this is a 5-4 decision, Buck, then as long as this sticks at a 5-4 decision, every conservative justice is potentially under siege from a violent protester. Because in their mind, they're going to think, if I take out one of these justices, I'm telling you, I hate to even have to say it, but I think there are too many people who think that way.
After the decision comes out? Because I think this is a lot of it is this is pro-abortion propaganda we keep hearing about how, it'll never normalize and the fights will continue forever. It'll go to the states. A lot of things go to the states. States have different rules about a whole range of issues. I think that'll take a lot of the heat out of this once people realize what's really going on.
I think 5-4 won't. That's why it needs to be 6-3. Because if you have to replace two conservative justices to overturn this ruling, that becomes much more difficult in order to pull that off, which is why I think if Chief Justice Roberts truly cares about the legitimacy of the court, he needs to make this a 6-3 decision so that for the rest of the next several years, as this becomes more mainstream and it goes back to the states, which I think is the right decision, there isn't the constant drumbeat of only one justice needs to be changed and Roe v. Wade becomes the law.
But I mean, look at
again.
look at Obamacare, right? I mean, there have been momentous decisions that have gone down 5-4, and we learned. I mean, people will complain, of course, but Clay, they'll complain at 6-3 as well. That's I guess they're going to say
it's harder to think that there are going to be two justices that you can replace, hopefully, in the next decade than it is to think if we replace one person, this ruling disappears.
Well, how many did Trump get, right? If you think about it. I mean,
yeah, but all being on the conservative side. Trump got 3, which was a huge deal. But the odds, and honestly, the odds, partly that was because one was already held up, right? So he got 2. But that's just my fear. My fear is that if it's 5-4, it doesn't have the legitimacy. I do think the big swing from 5-4 to 6-3 is significant.
And here we have, speaking of fear, they're trying to tell everybody that the real concern is actually from pro-life people becoming violent and taking
this is
action.
just a lie.
This is from CBS Evening News. Play it.
An intelligence bulletin reviewed by CBS News warns extremists could be mobilizing during this powerful debate nationwide, potentially targeting abortion clinics and government officials.
So now let me tell folks about how this goes for a second.
You've done these.
Because I've done these, okay?
Yeah.
I've written for the PDB many times, the President's Daily Briefing. I've run the PDB briefing for the president before, so I know how this system works. What happens here is you have a policy official, Clay. Could be anybody, DOJ, White House official, who knows, right? You have somebody high up in the chain who says, I need an assessment of, right? Let's say Merrick Garland wants, the FBI analyst or DHS analyst to do an assessment on what the threats are. You're an analyst. You're writing the assessment. They get to set what the parameters are, and you also know who your customer is. So when they send down to you, as let's say Merrick Garland would in this example, hey, give us a sense of what the risk is from pro-life and pro-choice factions for violence right now. You know exactly what the tasking is, and you're going, if you want to get that award, if you want to get the pat on the head, you want to get the pay increase in 6 months or whatever, the step increase, you give what you're supposed to give, which is a could be on both sides assessment. Because let me tell you, if you do the other thing of saying, hey, I'm an analyst who's actually looking at the data and the information, and I'm going to send this memo to Merrick Garland that says the threat of violence is overwhelmingly from pro-choice lunatics or pro-abortion lunatics right now, guess what? You're never getting asked to write that memo again, and your superiors are going to say you're not a very good analyst. So I'm just telling everybody, when CBS says, we saw a draft intelligence memo, you can get them to write an intelligence memo saying that Mars is going to invade tomorrow. It's not hard to do.
Here's the other thing that you were hinting at, and I think we need to emphasize. I went and talked at my school board, Buck. Remember that back in August? Talk about the lack of importance
they're going to send you to
masks.
Gitmo, man. You're on the list now, Travis.
And I got called a domestic terrorist. Where the hell is Merrick Garland with actual domestic terrorism going on? How is it that he can't say we need to condemn what is going on right now in terms of domestic extremism and violence that's being brought to bear by the left wing in the United States right now? A truly good, because I'm not even going to try to say impartial because I don't think it exists, but a truly decent Department of Justice head would at least treat actual violence associated with the left wing in this country and the potential Alito opinion as aggressively as he treated moms and dads who decided to go and speak out at their school boards. Yet they were labeled domestic terrorists, Buck. And we haven't seen, at least I haven't so far, Merrick Garland calling out any of the left-wing violence and pointing out that that is actual domestic terrorism and deserves to be investigated fully by our Department of Justice. I haven't seen it.
The terrifying realization that everybody should have, because this is reality, folks, is the same way that corporations have been leveraged, have been utilized as part of the left-wing tactic to be weapons against their political enemies. The federal apparatus, the same thing. The federal government. You don't need to have everybody. There are a lot of Republicans who work at the federal government, a lot of good people, a lot of patriots. All you need is to be the Bolsheviks within the system who control the levers of power and use it when you have to. And that's what they do. That's certainly what's happening in Merrick Garland's DOJ, just like it was happening under Eric Holder's DOJ under Obama. Same thing.
We need Bill Barr back in office.
We do. He was good.
He was very good.